Welcome to Cape Fear Business Roundtable. I'm Frank Williams, and we appreciate you joining us. Our guest today is Jeff Moss, who has a number of different titles that I will get into in a moment. But Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Frank. Thanks for
And
having me.
and look forward to talking. I've got a feeling this could be a long podcast if we're not mindful of time, because we could probably talk all afternoon. But before I jump into the bulk of the podcast, I do want to mention our two sponsors, which are my two businesses. Pioneer Strategies is a public relations, marketing, and strategic communication firm. Pioneer can help you with website design, digital advertising, traditional PR, and communication planning. The other sister company is Pioneer Specialties, and we are a promotional products distributorship. We can help you put your logo on just about anything. And both of those businesses are linked from the homepage at the podcast website, capefearbusiness.com. And now that we've got that out of the way, Jeff, thank you again for joining us. And I'd like to start out with some just general personal background on whoever our guest is. And obviously, we live in a fast growing area. I mean, that plays into what you do for a living. But tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you wound up in southeastern North Carolina.
Absolutely. So I am originally from Georgia, small town called Plains with a population of under 700. So they're really, I think about where we live in Southport and Leland, and I'm trying to think of a town of a population that size that produced a president of the United States, and nothing comes to mind. So that's
Yeah.
where I grew up. I was living in Forsyth, Georgia, when I took a job in Wilmington, North Carolina, and that's when we moved up in 2014, originally to Topsail Island, and we were there, and then the company went through a restructuring, and we wound up in Southport. So we built our first home ever down in Southport, and that's where we currently reside.
Well, let's talk about, before we get into work, what is your favorite non-work related thing to do or place to go in this part of the state? Mine
Well,
always involve food. I've found that's not the case with everybody else, but it may be. So let's hear what you think.
we certainly enjoy food, and Salt 64 down on the island. Oak Island is phenomenal. Camille and I, my wife and I, and our daughter Mallory enjoy eating there. Mallory, our daughter's special needs, so a lot of our extracurricular activities involve entertaining her. So we go to a lot of events that are related to special needs children or adult children. Beyond that, obviously going to the beach and hanging out in the area. I love flying, so I spend most of my non-work time still in a helicopter and still flying around, all over the place. I go to Pax River, Maryland, at least twice a year to fly Navy test pilot school candidates. I'm a safety pilot and an AH-1 Cobra for them, which was the aircraft I flew in the United States Army. So those are my hobbies, and I also play with the Salty Dogs band, and that finds us in a lot of different venues, and that's always fun.
And I believe you also have a hobby of clogging as well.
Yeah,
I've seen
and
a
and it's
video or
not a.
two of you.
Everybody's thinking, well, no, I'm not a plumber. Clogging is a form of Appalachian dancing and hoedown stuff that came out of the Appalachian Mountains. But back in the day, people wore wooden shoes and they would
Right.
make a clicking noise, and that's where clogging came from. But yes, I used to be a professional dancer. I always coined that professional dancer, and then they go, oh my gosh, because nobody imagines professional clogging. They think of other things like
They think of
Julianne Hough. Yeah,
other things that might be incongruent with some of the things that I know that you believe.
absolutely.
Well, talk a little bit about your career journey. You mentioned the Army, and obviously that's a big part of it, but certainly you weren't in the Army your entire career before you started your current business. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how that led to where you are now, and then we'll jump into talking about your current business and also a book that you recently released.
Absolutely. So I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1987 with a BS in agronomy business, and I've never used it. I went in the United States Army, became an attack helicopter pilot. I was in the Army for a grand total of about 8 years, 5 of that active. Fought in Desert Storm, came home from Desert Storm and went into corporate America. I was in pharmaceutical sales for a little over 25 years. I got downsized out of corporate America back in 2017-18 timeframe. And from there, I bought a franchise business, College Hunks Hauling, Junk, and Moving. I've got a franchise, the Wilmington, Leland, Southport, basically Brunswick County, New Hanover County. That area encompasses our zone all the way up to Sneads Ferry. So the rectangular cut from Myrtle Beach North is part of my franchise operation. And then we have a second location in Georgia, which encompasses the middle of the state. So that was not a planned event. I know that you're probably curious, how in the world did that happen? When I got downsized, it became the norm for companies to look at guys of my age, and I'm in my early 50s at that point, and you're the guy that's going to get pretty much on the board of getting let go. So
Right.
I didn't want to go through that again, and at that point I was 52, and I thought the only thing I can do to have any semblance of control is to own a franchise. Hauling junk and moving was certainly not on the pinnacle of considerations, but I did have a friend that worked with me at Pfizer way back that got downsized in 2009. He owned the franchise in Atlanta, Georgia. So I called him and I said, "Hey, do you think I can make a go of this in Wilmington, and will we starve?" And he said, "No, you're not going to starve. You're going to be okay." But he says, "You're going to like this for a reason you're not thinking about." And I said, "What?" He said, "Our company's one of the core values is building leaders. We work with a lot of young men, and you've been building leaders most of your career. I've watched you do it for over 20 years, and you're going to love that part of this business." And it's absolutely true. We work with a lot of young men that are, a lot of them are seeking to find themselves. They haven't quite figured out what they want to do in life, and we're able to come in and influence them. And the building leaders part, I'm about to have, I believe, my fifth college hunk take a career in the military. So I've got four guys that under my tutelage have gone through either officer candidate school or
Awesome.
they've enlisted in the military and they're now serving our country. So little did I know that this company was going to take me down that path of turning people's lives around to a degree. We haven't always been successful, Frank, but it is definitely part of our daily ambition is to be a positive influence, not only on our clients, but obviously our employees as well.
And I've certainly observed that in you. And just interesting by way of comparison, one of the ways I started my business is I was in sales, and I was in a sales job I was not cut out for. I was trying to sell financial products when I was in my late 20s, and all my network was broke college students.
Yeah,
And so that didn't work out. And I started freelancing while I was looking for a job. And instead of landing a job, I wound up starting a business because I landed a client. So it was, and necessity is the mother of invention, different point in my life than when you got downsized, but a similar
yeah.
situation. And a few years later, I realized I'd had my business longer than I'd ever had any single job. And it wasn't that long at
I
that point in
think
my career.
I think one of the greatest gifts that God gives us is perspective. And it's
Absolutely.
unfortunate that you don't have perspective until you get a lot of gray hair on your head and get some distance on things. But I think God wanted me here, and that's the only way I can explain how somebody with my career path that led up to 2018 would wind up owning not only a franchise business, but especially a junk hauling and moving company.
And well, speaking of your business, tell us a little bit more about what you do. And I know you've got some ways you describe it, and what you do, who are your typical clients, and and how you help them, and that type of thing, and what you think sets you apart. Those are a lot of questions lumped into one there.
Yeah, real easy to handle though. I mean, our simple motto is we move the things you love and we get rid of the things you don't. So on the moving side of the house, we essentially are a full service mover. That's local and long distance. The fancy words are intrastate, which means anywhere inside the state of North Carolina, and interstate, which means anywhere in the country in the contiguous United States. So we have been to Maine, we've been to Washington State, we've been all the way to the West Coast, and we've been to the Northeast coast. So anybody that's moving, certainly looking at a company like College Hunks, we are not one of the big van lines where you're joining all of your furniture on a truck with other people's stuff, and then they get to you when they do in terms of delivery. What sets us apart is the crew that loads you is the crew that's going to deliver you, and that we've got your possessions on our truck. And when they get on it, they don't get off it until they're unloaded at your destination. So that's more of a white glove boutique level service compared to the big van lines. On the junk hauling side, our preference, we hate to use the word junk. Certainly there is there are things that are junk, that need to go to the landfill. But a lot of this is more unwanted items. For example, if you're doing an estate sale and not
Right.
everything goes away and you've got to clear out a property so that you can go, well, these were your parents' things or your family members' things. So I prefer to say unwanted item removal. And what we try to do is repurpose anything that can be repurposed. So one man's junk is another man's treasure. Being a good steward of the environment and not filling up the landfill is a priority for us. So if we can find anywhere to donate, so we partner
Right.
with Habitat for Humanity and other charities that can repurpose and reuse items that other folks are just done with. So that's really the two sides of the business. And frankly, if somebody's moving, they tend to need to get rid of things that they don't want to move. So the
Absolutely.
two businesses work hand in hand. What sets us apart, I got into a little bit about the boutique white glove service. Our company we're approaching our 7th anniversary. And if people go on and look at Google reviews, first of all, let me say no company's perfect, and I'm always quick to get that out. Moving is a contact sport. You're putting all your possessions in the back of a truck
Yeah.
and moving down a road full of potholes and all. So it definitely is a contact sport. I liken it to putting a bunch of kids in the back of a truck and driving to Florida and think nobody's going to get a black eye, right? But we do our best to protect property and to do the right thing by our clients. The sets us apart deal is we're approaching 1,800 Google reviews. So I encourage anyone looking to move to go in and look at number of Google reviews, what is the rating, and we're holding a 4.9 on a scale of 5, which I'm really proud of that. Again, not being perfect, but we seek perfection. And the other thing is the consistency of the reviews. If you're reviewing any business, Frank, any company, and you're looking at Google reviews, what happened a year ago is not what's going to happen tomorrow. So the important things are look at the consistency of
Right.
performance, the consistency of reviews. When do they get their last review? Are there any bad ones in there? And certainly no company is flawless. So every company is going to have some negativity going on and some bad reviews. But when you're pulling a 4.9, you're on average. I'd say we're 98 percenters. The majority of the time, we're doing really great work. I'm proud of our hunks and our team.
And I think especially with that many reviews, it's if you've got 5 reviews, 2 bad ones can skew it. And there
Absolutely.
are people who go out there and give bad reviews just because they want to give bad reviews. But if you've got 1,800, that's kind of hard to skew. That's a good number. And we've used you guys a couple of times. I know you helped move my wife's family's stuff from a couple of different houses in Charlotte to here, and you guys even came and moved a 400-pound conference table up a flight of stairs at my office,
Yeah, we
and
sure
uh,
did. I
and
remember.
and
I
even put
remember
it
all of
together. So
those.
yeah. So I've
Well,
certainly worked with you guys and have seen the work that you do and also the leadership development. We'll talk about your book in a minute, but I want to tie your book together to something related to this. You mentioned in your book a negative experience with a military moving company while you were in the military and touched on a little bit about how that shaped the way you approach what you do owning a moving company. Can you talk about how those two things tie together?
it did. So my wife and I, between corporate America and being in the military, we've moved 17 times. So I've seen it. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
I've certainly seen in corporate America, white glove movers, and in the military, we saw the other side, which is in a lot of cases lowest bidder mover. So I'm flying a helicopter with lowest bidder parts. A mover, you're going to go with the lowest bidder mover, and their care for your property is sometimes good and not sometimes not so good. I also witnessed it. Our son is an Army Apache pilot, and he's a captain, and I've witnessed him moving. I generally will go and be there to try to protect his property during a move
Right.
because clearly we know what we're doing. um, but we gave up a couple of years ago, and I'll take one of our trucks and hire local people, and then I'll supervise them and make sure his stuff gets protected and moved properly. It's not what we want in America. I mean, America's fighters need the best of everything. And honestly, these are the guys that are standing on the wall. Famous line from a movie, but it's true. They're standing
Yeah.
on the wall. They're willing to protect us. And I would say the same with our deputy sheriffs, our local first responders, anybody that's willing to stand between you and somebody trying to do harm to you deserves the very best that America can offer them. So In that vein, we have recently, last year, started conducting military moves. We're trying to do it, but again, with margins so thin, it's very challenging. But I can tell you, we've done, I think, 22 moves up at the Lejeune with Marines primarily, and we got a 5-star rating with that, because a lot of them I'm going on site myself, frankly. I'm getting directly involved, but I'm coaching our guys. And I'll give you one example. Military guys aren't going to really tip, and movers really lean on tips, to augment their income. And I've had to explain to our guys that, you're saluting them, frankly. You're giving them the slow hand salute for their
Right.
service, and they believe in their mind that the tip they're giving you is serving their country and being willing to give the ultimate sacrifice so that we can live the life we're living. So if you get even $1, feel blessed. But it's a total different mindset, and it's very patriotic. We even have them wearing shirts with the American flag on the back, just to again salute the patriotism and thank them for their service.
And a lot of those military guys do not get paid much compared to what they do. I mean, you know that,
No,
and
no,
that's something. If you're a general, you might get paid, but if you're a newly enlisted man or woman, you're probably not getting paid enough to be able to afford to make that tip. And
no, absolutely.
um, well, changing gears a little bit. Obviously, you've written this book, My Leading Edge, and I see all the books behind you, so I can tell you're a reader as well, and probably like me, a collector of more books than I ever have time to read. But talk about what inspired you to write this book, and also what the title means, "My Leading Edge." And we'll start digging into this, because
Sure.
I finished it this past weekend and I enjoyed it, and I hope that everyone listening to this will order it and read it. I think you'll be glad you did. But tell us about what led you to this point.
Well, this is a good test since you've read the book. So the goals and hopefully what you got out of the book and what my intentions were, I'm very curious to see how they align with what you experienced in reading it. First of all, I have to salute my wife, Camille, that Camille got involved, and she's an excellent writer, and she made the book readable. I started journaling a couple of years ago, and I believe, Frank, the way this happened, and you and I have been friends on Facebook for a long time. I tend to I write short stories sometimes, and I'll get on Facebook and talk about what it's like being raised on a peanut farm in Southwest Georgia, what it was like to serve our country, what it was like to deal with a very ill child,
Right.
and people would come at me pretty regularly and say, Jeff, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. So I started journaling a couple of years ago, and I purposefully journaled in chronological order, starting on the farm and working my way through life, the life my wife and I had, bringing perspective to the table. I mean, when you're in the middle of the swamp, you forget your feet are wet. If you're standing in water and you've been standing in it, but once you get through it and you start looking back on your experience and the things that have happened to you along the way, you can start understanding how God had a plan in your life. And in the moment, you may have missed that individual that God put in front of you. But in the book, I shared that it started with God giving me two great parents that introduced me to Jesus Christ. And I think Jesus is the ultimate leading edge. So the leading edge is the front edge of a prop on an airplane or a rotor blade on a helicopter. It's the strongest part of the blade. It's the first thing to strike the air or anything that comes in its path, like a bird. And typically, it's strong enough that it can withstand some things, but you can't hit a tree or a telephone pole with it and it cut through it. But it's
Right.
a tough part of the blade. And I always saw my dad as that person that blazed the trail, just like the leading edge of a rotor blade. Dad blazed his way through life. But someone told me the other day that Dad lived his sermon. My dad just passed away in January, and it's been tough for me to handle that.
Yeah.
But I had a goal of getting the book published before Daddy passed away. And one of the things I will treasure for the rest of my life is seeing my mother read the book to my dad, because it was really a tribute to him as it started and a walkthrough of life and how Dad prepared me for it. So right in the first pages of the book, you're going to see a Bible verse straight out the chute. My favorite, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Daddy taught me that at a very young age. We went to church every Sunday. We rarely missed, and we were in small town Methodist church. So the book is really a tribute to my dad, but it's bigger than that. I wanted people to see at the end of every chapter, and even sometimes during the chapter, I will talk about lessons learned. Better said, moss sauce. Things Dad taught me, things that are just the sauce of life. And
Right.
the secret ingredient to Frank Williams is Frank Williams. You're your special person. And I know that you're close to your dad, and you were raised similarly to me on a farm with a dad that taught you how to do things. So the takeaway from the book is my dad never said, task, condition, standard. That's a military term. But honestly, everything Dad did was task, condition, standard. We are going to go bush hog a field. We need to hook a tractor to a rotary mower. He showed me the process and instilled in me the value that doing things right the first time keeps you from having to go back and correct it. So my wife and I are writing the book from my journaling, and we figured out that the thread of the book was aviation and our relationship with Christ. Those two things have been part of our life since we first met, ironically, in a Sunday school classroom in Cairo, Georgia, where she grew up. And I was the Sunday school teacher of all things. My wife showed up, and we dated for 4 years, got married, and started our family. The big chapter in the book is chapter 5, and I titled that chapter Auto Rotate, which is the engine quit. In a helicopter, when your engine quits, you go into what's called an auto-rotational descent. Gravity's pulling you to the earth, and the airflow changes. And if you've ever seen a box fan on a porch with wind blowing through it, Frank, and the blades are turning, that's what an auto-rotation is. You're building kinetic energy in your rotor system. As the helicopter is coming down, airflow is coming up through the rotor system, and you're building kinetic energy, and you use that energy to land. But the big takeaway is you're generally not going to get the engine restarted. You are coming down. And helicopter pilots, airplane pilots, pilots in general are grilled on emergency procedures. We practice them in the simulator. We practice them when we can in the aircraft. And when the emergency happens, instinct kicks in. You start following the checklist, following procedure. So everything I had done from a young child on that peanut farm in Georgia to going through the military and everything up to the point that our daughter Mallory got severely ill, I had a checklist. When she got sick, there was no task, condition, standard.
Right.
It was a new chapter, a new verse. It was totally being written every day. And what I believe people will find is if they read the book, and I'm curious what your takeaway was, that we did everything we could to get her help, but it wasn't until we were completely exhausted and out of ideas that our phone rang. And it was a neurosurgeon from Hackensack, New Jersey, that wanted to help our daughter desperately. And frankly, he saved her life. And
Right.
we have a 35-year-old that was predicted to have that she wouldn't make it till 6. She's 35. You've met her. She can walk, talk, chew bubble gum, carry on a conversation, and figure out a Wheel of Fortune puzzle. She'll never be able to live alone, but she's quite functional and quite capable. And I think that is that's a blessing from God. And interestingly, as much as he put Camille in my life and other people that have been such a positive and wonderful influence on me, he put Dr. Free right in front of us
Right.
when we had given up all hope.
And I'll share my takeaways, and you tell me how they compare. And these are in no particular order. And I probably could have written 20 more, but these are just a few that I wrote down right off the top of my head. One is your early experiences absolutely shaped who you are today. The people in your life, the things you went through, and you talk about growing up on a farm. I saw two things on Facebook a while back. One of them was, you can't intimidate me. I had to hold the flashlight for my dad when I was a kid.
Yep.
And you've probably been through that. And there was an example in your book where someone tried to intimidate you, and you said, "Look, unless you're going to pull a gun, you're not going to scare me."
Yep.
And that's because of things you had been through. And the second thing is you've been through a lot of challenges. Certainly the situation with your daughter, that could have broken a lot of people, but it didn't stop you. It grew you. You came through it because of your faith, and I think because of your partner in life, which is the
Yeah.
next thing I wanted to talk about was, you talk a lot about your partnership with Camille and how she was instrumental in that, but also about your faith. And then the last two things, and I think you've touched on these, are your passion for developing others, and that there are a lot of practical takeaways in the book. Not just, you can read a lot of books that are pie in the sky theory, and it sounds good, but you can't do anything with it. But there's a lot of things in here that people can take it and apply it to their daily life. I'm a checklist person. I know others that aren't, that I wish were.
Yeah.
And if you had the checklist, you wouldn't have to do this again because you would have already done it. But that's a different soapbox. But so
Sure.
so how did my takeaways compare to what you would want people to
Uh,
take away?
Perfect. I said the other day, and I realized I made a mistake the minute it came out of my mouth. I said that the book is positive. There really isn't any negativity. And then I said, well, what about that redheaded major over in Saudi Arabia? And I said, oh yeah, I forgot. Well, there were some challenging people. There were challenging doctors that we dealt with. I mean, when
Absolutely.
somebody walks in your hospital room on Sunday morning and you're expecting them to tell you something good and they tell you that your daughter's going to be dead or retarded within 12 months and they do it in a matter of fact way,
Yes.
they suck all the air out of the room. And in my opinion, that takes away all hope. I believe you should be honest with people. But at the end of the day, when you rule out God and when you rule out, our Lord and Savior, then you've taken away people's hope. So I don't believe that I think it's appropriate to tell people the truth, but I think it's also appropriate to tell them that your hope lies in us. It lies in, I mean, there's so many people that have been cured. I mean, we see it every day that folks with cancer that were given 4 months to live are still around 6 years later. So
Absolutely.
keep seeking hope within reason. The other thing, with that major, that was probably my first test toe to toe where I had to, as a first lieutenant, stand up to somebody that theoretically, majorly outranked me.
Right.
But I was doing what I was told, and that's the way Dad raised me. We would have farm workers, try to cut corners, and I might be in a supervisory role, for example. Go, no, this is the right way to do it. There's a right way and a wrong way for everything. So Dad really instilled in me a set of values. I never heard him yell at anybody. I never heard him be disrespectful. He set a very good tip of the spear example of what the servant leader model should look like. I'm not him. I told Mom said I would do well to be exactly like my dad. So, well, Mom, I try, but that's a pretty high mark, to try to achieve. But the takeaways are there. I have been getting, good feedback from folks. It may or may not be the book they expect when they start reading it. I'm not sure, but we are getting good reviews on Amazon. We're getting great reviews on Facebook. I haven't had anybody that I've run into that they have not liked the book if they've read it, but Frank, they're getting things out of it that I didn't expect. I mean, we just had a physician that I called on for about a year. I didn't know him that well. He ordered the book and then he called me and said, hey, I need 7 more copies. And I'm giving one to every one of my friends and my children. I want them all to read the book. The other one that's really shocking to me is, our wives throw us all under the bus and tell the truth about it. A wife, and I'm not going to say the name, but you know this lady, she said, my husband does not read, Jeff, and your book came in the mail and I opened it up and handed it to him. He sat down and started reading it, and on the second day he was done, and he looked at me and said, order a copy of this for one of our children. See, I don't believe that was the work of myself or my wife. I think that God gave us the story, He gave us the words, and then she was able to put them together in a manner that seems to be helping people. So the thread of the book, not only aviation, but our relationship with Christ, Frank, was all these people that came along at different points in my life that wanted to help me achieve.
Absolutely.
So I see what you do and what I do and what other people that were raised by good families and good parents. It's our mission to help other people achieve, and when they do, we all win. It's a win-win-win.
And, a couple of other final takeaways, your persistence through this. You had a lot going on and you were persistent. And one thing I would say, to anybody out there, if you have a family member that has a health issue of any kind, you need to be their advocate because nobody else will. I've seen that with family members who were in assisted living facilities that, the quality of their care is often directly proportional to how often family shows up unannounced. And,
The thing that really bothers me, and I'm very open about it, is my wife is a pharmacist. I had been in the pharmaceutical industry for a long time, so I'm talking to doctors every day.
right.
We have a general capacity to be able to learn and understand processes. We knew how to deal, for example, with pharmacy benefit managers that were trying to switch their meds all the time. We knew how to combat that and how to put in prior authorization to fight it. What scares me is some of these children that are ill aren't fortunate to have parents that understand how to navigate the medical system. They may not have the capacity to fully grasp their child's condition and to be able to speak intelligently about it, and they generally just get pushed down the road. Kick the can, kick the can.
Yeah.
I see that as, I mean, that really bothers my wife and I tremendously, and we have been able to help a lot of parents navigate through situations with their children or family members. But it's a shame that that's the way the system sometimes works for people.
And it's such a complicated system. It's that could be a whole different podcast, so we won't get too far off
Sure.
onto that. But one important question about the book: where can people buy it?
It is available on Amazon. It's at the Apothecary in St. James, if you happen to be in
Okay.
St. James and go to the pharmacy there. The easiest place to get it, Frank, is on Amazon. If you go there, you can order it and they'll have it to you in a couple of days. I love the way they do things. They don't print like 10,000 copies. When you go in and order a book on Amazon, they print it
Yeah.
and they ship it. So I don't have a warehouse full of the books. Camille and I have them. If we can actually work through you, if somebody wants a book, and I still say, our autograph's worth a plug nickel. That's a good South Georgia term. But if they want it personalized for somebody or they want it autographed, we are happy to do that. Frankly, we are honored and we feel blessed that somebody cares enough that they want us to write a note to someone that they would like to give a copy of My Leading Edge to.
Absolutely. Well, changing gears back to a couple of closeout questions because I've learned that people have short attention spans, and we're getting close to the end of most of our listeners' attention spans, probably.
Sure.
But what have you learned during your career, all of your career, that you wish you'd known the day you started?
Well, I Well, I guess the bottom line is if you let something happen to you once, it's going to happen to you. And when you think that you have figured it all out, somebody's going to show you something you never thought was possible. So I wish that, there was a way to know everything, every loop. If you knew how to close every loop and you knew how to facilitate avoiding, the chaos that happens in our worlds, it would be a great thing. But what I really try to bring out in the book, I literally do every day at the office. I start with what can go wrong. I haven't done that all of my career, but certainly, in aviation and whatnot, if you're pre-flighting an aircraft, you're looking for flaws that
Mhm.
can lead to catastrophe. And you do that, it's safer on the ground.
Yeah.
You'll love this one. You know what the two most useless thing to a pilot are?
What?
The runway behind you and the air above you. So
Interesting.
use the entire runway for takeoff,
Right.
and that way, if your engine quits, you can probably land. And the other one is, altitude's your friend. When something goes wrong, the further you can glide, the more time you have to react to an emergency, the better. Apply that to business. Get ahead of the problems, anticipate them, and then try to rectify things before they get out of hand.
And that's great advice. I was a Boy Scout a lot longer ago than I want to admit, but the Boy Scout motto was be prepared. And I think that goes into asking what can go wrong. It's a lot easier if you prevent it from happening than have to clean it up.
Yeah. It,
Well,
if you could get all your employees to care as much as you do, that'd be a gift too. I haven't figured that one out, but we're trying hard.
uh, I don't know a single business owner anywhere that's figured that out, but that's the age old challenge of business ownership.
Yes, sir.
Well, what are you either reading right now, or what kind of podcast are you currently listening to that you think others might want to know about?
I listen to a lot of leadership podcasts. I believe that you never stop learning. And when I listen to other people talk about philosophically how they think and how they make decisions, that's really great for me. I've listened to leadership podcasts. It's really great that have people like Condoleezza Rice and other really, really intelligent people. I mean, two secretaries of state were on one podcast, and it was Condoleezza Rice and Madeleine Albright, and you find out that Madeleine Albright's dad was Condoleezza Rice's college professor. And I mean, listening to those two ladies talk about world issues and how they think about things is really enlightening. I'm reading a great book right now called For That One Day. And we know that the ultimate sacrifice for mankind was Jesus Christ dying on the cross to save us from our sins. Beyond that, the next one that a lot of people don't know about is a story of a man named Mutsuo Fushida and Sergeant DeShaver. Fushida was in charge of the attack on Pearl Harbor. He is the one that gave the order from the skies, Tora, Tora, Tora. DeShaver was a Doolittle Raider. Imagine that. The story is, but for that one day, that DeShaver was one of the few Doolittle Raiders that got taken prisoner of war and wound up in a Japanese POW camp. And he made a promise to God. He got his hands on a Bible. He found Jesus in a Japanese POW camp. And he said, Lord, if I survive this, then I'm going to become an evangelist and give my life to you. He literally came back to America after World War II. He went and got his degree in divinity. And then he went back to Japan as an evangelist.
Wow.
And guess who he runs into at a bus station? A gentleman on his way to meet with MacArthur. It was Fushida. And he hands him a Christian tract, which Fushida read. And then he got his hands on a Bible. He found Jesus, and then he sought out the man that gave him that tract, who was DeShaver. The two of them became disciples and missionaries together, and they worked together on the Billy Graham crusade right here in North Carolina. So it is a fascinating book where these two gentlemen that were against each other in war found a way to forgive each other, and they found that forgiveness in Christ, and then they spread the word.
And that's an awesome story. And I agree with you that you always need to be learning. And you mentioned earlier that it's kind of a shame that we don't have perspective till we've been around a while. But the best way to get that perspective is to honestly and sincerely listen to other people who have already been around longer than you.
I agree.
And I think that's why podcasts and books and other things, and even just going to lunch with somebody who's done something you haven't done, is such a valuable learning tool. And I'm a believer that if you're not moving forward, learning, you're falling behind.
I think the other thing I would add to that, Frank, is that I get along well with folks that I compete with, because we're all in this world to support and help each other. So I go to chamber meetings with folks that work for competing moving companies, and we're blessed in Brunswick County and Wilmington to have some really high shelf, top quality moving companies, and we're more of a brotherhood than not, if that makes sense. But I wish as a younger person that I understood better the perspective older folks were giving me. I don't know that I knew the questions to ask. And I think another thing that I've learned through the years, through happenstance, I worked for a leader, and he said, people don't know what they don't know.
That's
true. When you stop and you think about that, they don't know the question to ask because they don't know what they don't know. So as we are trying to help others be successful in life and in business and in anything that we do, sometimes we have to sit there and ask them questions to find out what they do and don't know, and then help guide them down a better path. And I think that is just simple leadership 101. And I know that's what you do at Pioneer Strategies. I've been in meetings with you, and I think you do a great job of asking questions that either elicit an answer or identify a problem in that I might not know the answer to that question, and I need to go find it. So salute Pioneer Strategies. And of course, I went to your wife and told her I wanted these little wooden things called round tuits to give to clients with our phone numbers on it, and she was able to find them. And we've still got bags of them that we give out to clients. When you get around to it, call my office and I'll hand them the little wooden nickel, the round tuit, and away we go. So again, it's your podcast, but you know what? Thank you for doing this and for helping me not only talk about College Hunks, but also talk about the book. I feel blessed that you read it, to be honest with you. I'm still in awe that so many people have purchased and they're reading this book, that I wanted it to be a family heirloom, if nothing else, and it got to be so much more than that. And I think that's God working his magic and doing what God
Absolutely.
does.
We're put in this world to leave it better than we found it, and you can't do that by keeping everything you've learned to yourself. And you've certainly put it out there, the good, bad, ugly, and
Yeah.
challenging and positive for people to learn from. And I commend you for that. Well, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you to everyone who's watching this when it posts in a couple of weeks. And I do want to encourage everybody, if you're watching this or listening online and you don't get notifications about episodes, please visit our website, capefearbusiness.com. You can sign up there to get email notifications or to follow us on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen. And thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Frank.